Welcome to another How Healthy Are You weekly educational podcast. My name is Dr. Thomas Brewer. I'm a PhD chemist and nutritional blood microscopist. I've got 3 blood-related questions to answer during this call, and also a product that's quite good for diabetes and extremely inexpensive. So first are the blood questions. So I've received these questions from a few different people in the past week, so I figured I would bundle them all together. The first is about the blood cells in general, the red blood cells and the white blood cells. People will see red blood cells moving across the monitor when I do a blood microscopy, or they will see the inside of the white blood cells moving, and that's actually phagocyte activity, but it's still movement within the cell. So people think that the red blood cells and the white blood cells are alive because there's this movement. But actually they are not alive. They are not living cells, meaning they are not single-celled organisms. The confusion here is all living things are made up of cells, but very few cells that make up a living species are living cells in and of themselves. So when we add up all these cells, we make a human, but the cells themselves really are not alive. The movement is just part of either the microscopy process. So red blood cells moving across the screen is just the whole drop flattening on the slide. That's all that is. And the inside of the white blood cells moving, that's just part of the white blood cell showing activity, but the white blood cell in and of itself is not a living cell. So that's the first question. The next question involves uric acid crystals, and the main cause for uric acid crystals is calcium deficiency. People then ask, well, how do I get more calcium? So let's go into your choices. The one choice is to take a calcium supplement, and I recommend people do this if they can't get enough calcium from their food. Most people that are taking calcium supplements really aren't getting any absorption. So these are the calcium supplements that have as an active ingredient or the main ingredient calcium carbonate. So when you see calcium carbonate or magnesium carbonate, these are pretty much useless products because the bond between the calcium and the carbonate or the magnesium and the carbonate is extremely strong, and we want that bond to break. So calcium carbonate pretty much exits the body as calcium carbonate. We would like the bond to break so we can absorb the calcium. So calcium carbonate supplements are almost always hard-pressed tablets. Another very bad sign. You do not want to use hard-pressed tablets as a supplement ever. It's just an example of the manufacturer telling you they don't want to help you. They want to take advantage of you. They want to make a lot of money on you selling a product that's very inactive and that was destroyed during the pelletization or tabletization process. So food would be a good way to get calcium. I recommend people do this first. Cucumbers are probably one of the best sources to alkalize the body and to be able to utilize calcium. Remember, we want the calcium to get to our bones and to get to the cells that need the calcium. We don't want the calcium to end up depositing on our arteries. That's a problem, and we want to eliminate that. And one way would be to get our calcium from plant-based sources. So cucumbers are great. Leafy green vegetables are great. Other green vegetables such as broccoli and asparagus, also great. If you think you're doing enough of that and you're still calcium deficient, one way to test whether I look at your blood and see uric acid crystals or yeast, but perhaps you'd like to do a little test yourself, just take your thumb and rub the other thumbnail across your thumb. So you're going back and forth over your thumb. And if you have ridges on that nail, on your thumbnail, and those ridges would be going back and forth, and so when you go across them, you'd notice this ridge. What that means is you're calcium deficient. So even if you're eating cucumbers and green leafy vegetables, you most likely need to supplement with a plant-based calcium. The absolute best plant-based calcium is coral calcium that is harvested underwater, not harvested from a beach or off the sand after the coral has been oxidized. So to get good absorption, you want 100% coral calcium, so that would be the Coral Life. But a nice little test, if you don't have access to me and my microscope, just to take your one finger and one essentially thumbnail and rub it across the other thumbnail and see if you've got ridges. So that would show a calcium deficiency. And as always, when I look at one's blood, the uric acid crystals indicate calcium deficiency. They may also indicate a protease enzyme deficiency, meaning just incomplete total digestion of proteins. But in my experience, most of the cause of the uric acid crystals is calcium deficiency. There are some cultures that constantly and consistently form uric acid, and in those cases, it's a protease enzyme deficiency, which is an enzyme that is produced in the pancreas. The third blood question is when I see parasites in one's blood, they'll always ask, well, where did those come from? Well, typically the parasites I see in the blood is from you consuming raw, healthy food. So when one consumes sushi or any raw fruit or vegetable, there's a chance that there's some parasitic bacteria on that food. And once that parasite or host of parasites, range of parasites get into your gastrointestinal system, they start growing if there isn't enough probiotic bacteria to kill them. And if there's an overgrowth, then it can get into the blood, and that's when I see it. So the source of parasites is often just from eating raw food, especially sushi, but it doesn't have to be sushi. It could be really anything raw. So just take probiotics. One probiotic a day is a very good maintenance dose, and if I see a lot of parasites in one's blood, you would probably need to take 3 or more probiotics per day for a month or two before dropping down to that 1 probiotic per day maintenance dose. So those were the 3 blood questions. The other question was based on diabetes and what a person can do, especially if they don't have a lot of money. So one of the best ways to essentially cure diabetes, I hate to use that word, but tremendous benefit to a person's A1C levels is just to consume a little bit of brewer's yeast per day. About half a teaspoon per day shows a marked improvement in lowering A1C levels. And this is something that the pharmaceutical industry does not want you to know about because it's much easier to sell diabetes medication rather than you healing yourself. This all started way back in the 1800s. So there was a claim that 2 tablespoons per day of brewer's yeast, so not a half a teaspoon, 2 tablespoons per day for 6 weeks, there was this claim that it cured diabetes. And 150 years later, it was essentially put to the test, as Dr. Greger likes to use that term. And the test was a half teaspoon a day for 6 weeks, and they did another test at 7 weeks and even more. And after 6 weeks, there was a decent improvement in people's A1C levels. So as a reminder, A1C is a common sugar number that people will get when they have a standard blood test. And what it does is it measures your sugar level over time. And just as a ballpark number to think about, you want your A1C to be under 6, and if it's over 6.5, that's the beginning of diabetes. Somewhere between 6 and 6.5 is considered pre-diabetes. But over 6.5, that's what you're looking at as a problem. And this number can go all the way up to 8, 9, or 10. So it's quite a sensitive number if the range between not having diabetes and having diabetes is 0.5. So between 6 and 6.5, you're in the pre-diabetes range. You want to be under 6 with this A1C level. So people that had A1Cs around 8 were dropping them to 6.5 just with half a teaspoon per day of brewer's yeast for 6 weeks or a little longer. Cost, about 4 cents per day, maybe 5 cents per day. This is something the pharmaceutical industry and allopathic medicine is not going to want you to do if you're diabetic. So the active ingredient was studied. People thought it was the trace chromium that's found in brewer's yeast, but no, that wasn't it. Another test was for the beta-glucans, which are in brewer's yeast, and by themselves, that didn't work so well. So just use the straight-up brewer's yeast for diabetes. I'm going to look into this product. I might start carrying it, especially with this data on how great it is for diabetics. Usually diabetics decrease their sugar intake, they decrease their meat intake, they decrease their bad fat intake. Taking brewer's yeast would be very, very simple. The other advantage of brewer's yeast is it reduces blood pressure. And I've talked to a number of people in the past few weeks that have just had a recent spike in their blood pressure, and they can't figure out why. I did a video that talked about the 3 main causes of blood pressure, whether it's some form of plaque on the arteries or some stress strands in the kidneys which filter the blood, so some sort of blockage in the kidneys, or whether it's just stress in the body and water also in the blood. Water or fats makes the blood heavier, so actually that's 4 main reasons for increased blood pressure, but these people had none of those. And so I recommend that they try the brewer's yeast. And so pretty much small amount a day, whether it's a capsule or 2 a day, or as a powder, just put it on your cereal or oatmeal or pretty much anything. So something to look into. I will be doing another podcast next week. In the newsletter, I mentioned my trips, so take note of that. And as always, don't keep me a secret.